Well, we still don't really know the result, but I think someone who is well qualified to talk about what the result might be and what Canada should do about it in the American election is Randolph Mank, retired ambassador, and for a time in Ottawa in charge of kind of overlooking our foreign policy with America and G7 meetings and working very closely with Americans. Randolph, that's a top of mind introduction. I hope you don't mind. Um, Anything you want to add to your credentials there?
No, nothing at all. It's a long and boring story, but I've really enjoyed all my time working with American counterparts. They're very highly professional.
Well, I've done a promo behind your back in which I said one of the joys of my career was going out to dinner or having offline conversations, or what you would call bilaterals, with some of your great colleagues and you, well educated, speak a couple of languages, posted in 3 or 4 countries, and you have a perspective that is unique. And I've invited people to listen into this and watch in. So, what do you make of the American election so far?
Well, it's of course a kind of a sordid story if one looks at it with a jaundiced eye, but from another perspective, what a celebration of democracy. The two-party system means that that country's always been sharply divided. The issues get really sharply, well, actually, I should backtrack. It's not really the issues that get so sharply divided as it is the personalities and the mudslinging that goes along with that, that really portray a divided society. But of course, this has been a modern election, so it's been unfolding for us on social network platforms and new media, and all sorts of funny games are being played or allegedly played that are kind of confusing to the outside viewer.
Well, let me just challenge one thing you said, because a lot of Americans are saying it now, that this is a celebration of democracy and all that good American rhetoric. However, all we're really doing is counting ballots. I mean, that should be the most basic thing in a democracy. It shouldn't be something for celebration. It should be a floor under which we never sink. Why is it such a big deal?
Well, in fact, it shouldn't be. It's a mechanical thing. And what the president did last night in his I think it was 2 a.m. speech, I wasn't awake for it, but I caught wind of it this morning on the news, was really jumping the gun in an unhelpful way. They do have to go through that very basic democratic process of counting all the votes. I mean, he's worried that somehow votes will be manufactured after the fact. Of course, you have to defend against that as well. But yeah, apparently it's going to take many days to complete the voting, and that is something very basic to democracy. They have to follow through.
Now, you're old enough to remember David Brinkley and his coverage of elections. And long about midnight, he would often say, a couple of county clerks in Nebraska could count these ballots quicker than these machines can. You've written about technology, and why is this so difficult? Shouldn't we be morphing into electronic voting and safe and secure systems for identifying voters, and have the result, by 9 o'clock, the full, complete, total result by 9 o'clock election night?
I mean, in an ideal world, that's the way it would work, but you'd have to have so much security around the electronic voting. And the reality is that the opportunity for bombardment of fake votes would be wide open. I saw some coverage last night. I think it might have been a Pennsylvania recording station where they were counting votes, and they were using a pinwheel printer to print out the tabulated count, because they didn't trust any printer that would be connected to the internet. So this was a printer from pre-internet days that they had kept virginal, in the sense of never having been exposed to the possibility of cyber espionage or trickery. And that's what they use. So you can see the paranoia is pretty deep.
Yeah, and a lot of our healthcare system still uses fax machines because you can't hack a fax. Okay, let's move into something other than the great conversation about democracy and history and politics and what have you. you're a diplomat. Let's just say you were still in charge or advising people who are in charge. Our friend John Weeks, when he was senior ADM of the US branch, you're advising them on what to do over the next few months if we have A, a lame duck period, and B, we're not sure who the lame duck is and who the next president is, as occurred in 2000. How do we keep engaging in American foreign policy and bilateral relations and trade relations with America in this kind of confusing period?
You know, Alan, it is a recipe that's tried and true. We have, if you talk to people who've been stationed in the United States, or those of us who've worked on relations with the United States, of course, as officials, we deal with counterpart officials who are in government departments. So that is meant to be apolitical. But as we advise our political masters on their engagement, we set up networks of contacts on both sides of the divide. We've always done that. And we make sure that everyone knows the Canadian position on the whole recipe of issues that are important in Canada-US relations. And we have a very good ambassador, very good team in Washington, as we always do. And I know they've been working both sides of the House and the Senate. They've been working with governors, they've been working with county officials. The networking down there is prodigious and very impressive. And it's always a surprise when someone doesn't know the Canadian issues. And I know our embassy deploys very quickly to address any gaps in people's awareness of how vital those relations are to both sides.
Now, you mentioned county officials, and my recollection is there are something like 7,000 different electoral districts in America, many with different rules and regulations. And then, of course, there are 50 states and so on. But in the American system, the local official or political operative is far more influential than a riding president in the Maritimes or Western Canada is in Canada. So that really makes you and your diplomatic colleagues' job a lot more difficult because you have so many more people to network with.
That's true. And, you know, the good news is that at that level, if you're in a state like Michigan, for example, or any of the northern states that are sharing borders with us and therefore have integrated economies, they're usually deeply aware of the issues at stake bilaterally between Canada and the United States because it's down at the jobs and growth level. You know, it's corporate level, company level. And, you know, whether it's the dairy farmers who now under the new revised NAFTA have better access to the Canadian market, and that has been an issue for them for years, or those who have been involved in the automotive sector, they know when a plant is moving a certain production line to Canada or in the other direction, they know what the issues are at stake. And so the local officials are usually at that level pretty well informed.
Let's touch collective security for a moment, because you did mention hacking and so on. And, you know, the Cold War has morphed into some sort of weird cyber war or potential cyber war. How are our relations with America about collective security, NATO, NORAD, patrolling the coasts, working together on those kinds of issues? It's not top of mind or top of the news these days because the Cold War has been over for a while, but still important. What's your view?
Well, it is vital. I mean, Canada has been getting a very easy ride on security because we have not been achieving the NATO target of 2% of GDP in defense spending. And yet we are under that American umbrella and assume that we can continue to enjoy our security based on that. We don't worry very much about attacks on our borders by other countries' militaries. And that is a luxury that is not really widely appreciated, but if it were taken away, it would be like taking away oxygen. We would be desperate for some form of protection. So we still have a joint command for NORAD. We're still members in good standing at NATO. Under the current administration in the United States, these things have all received a very good shaking, but let's hope that they will survive and be strengthened as a result of perhaps a little bit of shock treatment.
Yeah, and let's put the shaking in context. There have been complaints about Canada's percentage of GDP spending on military going back as far as I can remember in my life into the 1960s. And so there's nothing new with Trump complaining about that. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. That's certainly been a theme. My greater concern is that these long, slow procurement exercises, which are infamous in Canada for not actually delivering results, whether it's fighter jets or naval patrol ships, what have you, need to be reevaluated in terms of new technology that's available. Because heaven help us if there's ever another war of a world scale or anything that Canada's involved in, it's going to involve technologies that really are not like World War II, which is what we're still building for.
Well, I was going to say, and is that the right technology? Because a fighter, at the cost of a fighter plane, a tank, a ship, we might need a more sophisticated computer that fits inside this office, or some other gizmo that is unforeseen. Okay, we'll leave that for a moment. Let's go to trade, because if I were having one of those great long dinners with you or your colleagues that I used to have when I was on contract to what was called DFATE then, Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, I'd say, gee, if America's talking about contracting or bringing back part of the supply chain from China, are we down there going, hello, we're right here. We can build all kinds of stuff up here, cheaper, faster, better, and then it can be made in America because of the value of the dollar. So let's have you think of Canada as part of your supply chain. Is that a legitimate idea?
That's an absolutely legitimate idea. That's exactly what our people will be doing in the United States with both sides of the aisle. And I think it's fairly well understood when framed properly. NAFTA and now CUSMA, or whatever acronym you want to choose, um, is an incredible advantage to the United States because as the world deals with problems in maintaining a WTO that's meaningful against the rise of China and its dominance in manufacturing, and as we deal with the emergence of new technologies and supply chains that are strained now because of COVID, but even before that for nationalist reasons, here you've got an agreement that unites the world's largest market, the United States, and the richest market, with Mexico, which is still a source of low-cost labor, as well as being an enormous market itself, and Canada, which has enormous natural resources, as well as very advanced technological um, uh, I would say organizations, corporations, and universities that develop technology and are the source of knowledge industry development. That's a tremendous advantage in an unsettled world to have an agreement that unites all of that and puts the United States kind of in the pivot point of that. It's an advantage for all three parties, but for the Americans to frame it in that way so that they can see the strategic importance of how that really anchors their advantage in the world, I think is a fairly easy narrative to convey. And I think people generally pick up on that fairly quickly.
All right, another idea for you. Diplomats usually speak in, shall we say, diplomatic language, notwithstanding the WikiLeaks criticisms of world leaders that we read about some years ago. But let's just say President Trump is an easy person to tell a joke about. But let's get serious for a moment. For 50 years, you and I have been hearing that governments don't have the levers they used to be able to pull before you worked on G7 meetings as I did. And, the world doesn't care as much about the communique that comes out of those. They care very much about what multinational corporations say. However, Trump has shown in a weird way that government is still relevant, number one. Number two, he has done what many diplomats and world leaders wish they had done, and that is try to put China in its place. Comment on those two things, please.
Well, he's certainly taken public diplomacy into his own hands, hasn't he, with his Twitter feed? He speaks directly to the people as long as his tweet isn't taken down.
Well, in fairness, as did John Kennedy in live news conferences in 1961, which were considered equally as amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it's true that it takes a certain kind of person to use the technological levers of the day to the best advantages they see fit. And I think Trump has done that. No future president can go back from that. The problem is that corporations like Twitter and like Facebook now find themselves in a peculiar relationship with governments and with citizens that has not been adequately defined in law. So the Canadian government this week, you've seen how they've tried to address the over-the-top phenomenon, as it's called, to try to make sure that those who stream content into Canada are not therefore outside of CRTC rules on Canadian content. Well, that's basic, right? We have the legal framework. It's just that they've managed to leapfrog over it because there's such a unique kind of technology that's still kind of new and difficult to grapple with.
Well, and piece of trivia, I know I'm interrupting the answer to the question that I just asked you, but a piece of trivia, the German Justice Ministry 20 years ago prevented AOL, I believe it was, from allowing porn to get into Germany. And the Justice Ministry didn't care whether it came on a truck in the mail or via the proto-internet. They put a stop to it. So we can do much the same. All right, I've interrupted you, and it was also putting China in its place that I wanted to comment on.
Well, it's connected to the point you just made, because China is an example of a country who has figured out how to continue to block social networking that it feels is invasive to its system of control. So when you land in Beijing or Shanghai, your Facebook and Twitter feed aren't working. It's blocked. Trump has confronted the rise of China. Their purchasing power GDP has surpassed the United States, and if only because of their enormous population, it'll take a little longer for their GDP to exceed in absolute terms that of the United States, but not much longer. So, for us to be having conflicts with China that spill over into the globalized trade field is very unhelpful for all of us, whether it's the Meng Wanzhou case in Canada or the tariff issues that have arisen in the United States as Trump tries to repatriate supply lines. All of this is highly disruptive to what many of us have worked for an entire lifetime, which is to globalize trade to our advantage. And it is to our advantage to have globalized trade. You can, if you're a consumer, you've seen very clearly how your access to consumer goods has been increased exponentially because of Chinese manufacturing prowess.
Well, and yet, in fairness, there is one case study that puts that in another perspective, and that is Elon Musk. He found that he was procuring batteries in China, cobbling them together in Thailand, where they rusted on occasion because of the humidity. Then he'd get them into England, where he put them in a Lotus body and have some trouble with customs in both England, and then bringing them into America. And he just found that bringing the whole thing back into America was much more efficient. So notwithstanding the Herculean work of your colleagues, there are some cases, perhaps masks, perhaps other medical equipment, that should be made within our borders and easily accessible on short notice, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And, that doesn't contradict the thesis of comparative advantage. If it turns out that the comparative advantage for producing item X, let's say the battery for Tesla's cars, is not in China or Thailand or elsewhere, but it is in fact in the United States, then maybe we go through a transitory phase where you experiment with low cost labor, but you find there are other reasons why the comparative advantage equation actually puts you right back into a closer supply line, whether that's Canada, the United States, Mexico, what have you. So that's all just a natural flow of the economic model.
Now, here's the undiplomatic question. The joke is that more people write the communiques coming out of a G7 meeting than actually read those communiques. And I think that gives you a bit of a chuckle too, because there's an element of truth to that. But the diplomatic language during our careers was kind of a marshmallow. You know, in the fullness of time, as horizons recede, we had a full and frank exchange of views and an open door, an open mind, an open hand, you know, all that sort of stuff. And hasn't it been, in a weird way, refreshing even for you to hear President Trump cut through all that and just say this is bunk, or, you know, we're going to get him, or, you know, some kind of tough guy talk like that?
Absolutely. I mean, we all kind of like the disruptor, don't we? Yeah, I worked on the G7 for 4 or 5 years, and you're right. Those communiques were so turgid and tortured. By the time they were published, we could hardly deal with reading them. I mean, it was hard to edit because your eyes would just spin into the back of your head. But the exercise in having a conversation and the discipline of their foreign and economic ministries working together was a very positive one. So the output was less important than the process in that case. Although in some cases, you know, post 9/11, for example, coordinating on counterterrorism actions, financial tracking, and that sort of thing was extremely positive. And helping with development in Africa and vaccinations, that sort of thing is very relevant today. The G7 can do that.
I think both journalists, academics, diplomats, a lot of people, people dating in bars, get a lot more out of the open-ended question than something specific. So near the end of our time together, what should we all be looking for in the next few days and during the next presidency, whoever is the president?
Well, there's confusion, and I don't have the simple answer to how this is going to turn out, but the incumbent is highly legalistic, and the challenger and his team has said that they wouldn't accept a defeat if it was a close one. So it's going to go through a legal process, and the United States is famously adept at this. They have a Supreme Court that may, if the president is correct, be called upon to make a decision on some fine points of law. But they have a generally good legal system at that level, at least in terms of adjudication. So for Canada, there's nothing to do but sit back and watch and do what the officials and our leaders are doing right now, which is keep our mouths shut. We don't have to take a position on this. Just wait and see how this plays out. We're friends with all sides of this.
I think I'm quoting former Prime Minister Mulroney, who said to his cabinet, you don't have to speak in front of every open microphone you encounter. Not bad advice.
That's right. You know, I'm amazed. I'm part of an ongoing foreign affairs group of former ambassadors and officials who've now left the service and so speak freely, and they have large discussion groups online. And I'm just amazed at the 100% alignment behind the challenger, that people are emotionally invested in this as Canadians. And yeah, I don't get it. I just think you have to sit back. This is not our political system. It's we certainly have stakes in it, but the stakes, when you evaluate them clearly, are not 100% in our favor on either side. So I prefer to take a dispassionate political scientist kind of view of this and watch it. And I really don't have a horse in the race.
Randolph Mank, I know that you are retired from the diplomatic corps, but I know that you're not retired. You're still very actively engaged in consulting. So I can't wish you happy retirement, happy working life still.
Thanks very much. And same to you, Alan. It's been great talking to you again. Take care.
Come on back when we know what's going on.
Will do.
Thanks.
Cheers.